Hello, Saints for Nicholas here. Today I'll be reacting to JBat's Making the Worst Dark Lord Possible video. As ever, please watch his original video to support him, make sure I didn't make any mistakes, and please leave a comment, like, share, subscribe, all that. And without further ado, let's get right into it.
Everyone loves a villainous Dark Lord, but not the one we'll be writing today.
I see. Building on the style he used in the last video. Very good. Good to have a consistent motif, if you will.
Carrying on with our trend of madness, today we're going to discuss how to write the worst possible Dark Lord. There are so many great examples of this archetype. There's Sauron, Darth Vader, even Dracula in all his forms, and we're going to be dodging every single quality that makes them work. Dark Lords are defined by their power more than anything else. It is what separates them from other types of villains who, though perhaps influential in their own ways, do not rule empires and dominate populations in the way that a true Dark Lord does.
Now, it's interesting what I add at this point how, of course, Vader is a very archetypal Dark Lord, but he isn't the ruler of the Empire. That's Sidious. So I think that's interesting how Vader's often cited as part of this archetype, but he technically isn't a civilizational leader.
It's for this reason that the most important thing we can do with a Dark Lord possessing of all this power is to make them very, very cosmically stupid. As we all know, the best way to remain stable and in charge of a massive organization ruled by fear is to show complete ineptitude towards everything that you do. However, following this flawless train of thought might lead you to the conclusion that your Dark Lord isn't going to be intimidating if he's stupid, but also if he's smart, you won't be able to figure out how to get our underdog protagonist to ever beat them. And of course, it's a given that our protagonist is going to be an underdog, probably a teenager, maybe also a rebel, I might hazard. And so we'll just get the best.
Phew, at least maybe we'll get a better protagonist than the last video's guy. You should check out his last video, it was really good. Same style of satire as this. Had some pretty good advice.
Of both worlds. Our Dark Lord will be a genius, 300 IQ, multiple PhD kind of genius. We, the writer, may not be that or have those things, but if we write a character that we tell the audience is smart, then they might think we're smart too, and that's a win. It's even better if we emphasize his genius almost every single time that he's mentioned. But he'll be a genius, alright, except for when he interacts with anything to do with our protagonist. Whether we're talking about the mighty protagonist Von Generic or Jtholomew the Bold, Slayer
Never mind, Jtholomew's back.
Of dragons and all my detractors online from the previous video, either of them will have this uncanny superpower that makes it such that whenever they're in the Dark Lord's clutches, they always find a way to escape with a quip and a grin, and no injuries whatsoever, even if other quote-unquote important characters die in the process. We might give this superpower a name, or maybe make it a magic item. I think we'll call it the Armor of P. Lot, named for the legendarily unkillable hero of something extremely important that happened in our world's backstory that we'll never elaborate upon. It's even better if the Dark Lord is actually aware of, or at least implied to be aware of, the protagonist's existence before the main thrust of the story begins. Bonus points if they also know the protagonist will grow up to challenge them. But if you want to write true peak, you should make it such that not only does the Dark Lord know where the protagonist is, that they will challenge them, and even that they will eventually overthrow them, they still won't do anything about it.
So I just want to cut in here and say, there could be something very interesting, though, with a character who has some sort of, like, telepathic disruption ability, so that people around them, if they're hostile, are lulled and confused, or something like that. That could be an actually interesting character.
Because that's how you play 4D chess as a tyrannical overlord. Lose on purpose, and you're never truly beaten. However, we do need to maintain that intimidation factor. And so, we can't have our Dark Lord himself facing off against and losing to the protagonist so many times throughout the story. No, we need some henchmen. It'll quickly become incredible to the audience that these henchmen have a job doing much of anything, considering just how thoroughly they will be destroyed by our protagonist. They probably wouldn't even be capable of fitting square pegs into square holes if all they had was square pegs. But our Dark Lord can only really seem to find these quality of guys to work for him. He's even sure to only promote the very dumbest of them to sit at his right hand. Could there be some sort of metaphor for dictatorial governments having to select for loyalty rather than competence, and thus creating dysfunctional institutions that destroy themselves over time? No, because you must remember the only group dumber than these henchmen is the audience, so they wouldn't get something like that anyway. The important thing is that all these henchmen give the protagonist something to aura farm with in their destruction.
Yeah, I don't really have too much to add. I think people who are more eloquent and learned than I have you've probably come across them talking about the tropes of minions in various media.
while also totally not making our Dark
Also, that was a very cool Skyrim background with the mammoth.
Lord look inept for sending these fools after someone so clearly above their pay grade. The bottom line is, the henchmen don't matter anyway, so let's actually figure out who our Dark Lord is.
You know, there is, in one of those nuggets of good advice, there is something in that, depending on what type of story you're telling. And I think this applies to pretty much every story, unless there are only like three characters who are going to be really detailed or something. Every story is going to have the background NPCs. So it could be that for your story, the background NPC minions don't matter too much. But it'll all depend on what kind of story you're going for and where you need the focus.
We're only mentioning it now because it's a secondary concern, really. A Dark Lord is a force, not a character, after all.
Okay, this is actually one of those, like, just straight up very good pieces of advice. Potentially, yeah. Of course, it's not literally true, because being a Dark Lord is a person. If it was just like a tornado, that can't think, it's just there, that's not character. But there is a lot of value in portraying certain types of antagonists, or yeah, I mean, I guess would generally be an antagonist, even if this is an evil POV story, as almost like a storm or volcano or something implacable, all but unstoppable, and not having much of a discernible personality due to the physical and emotional distance. So again, there could be something very useful to take away from that. Like, I think in Lord of the Rings, we only see the story from Sauron's perspective once, very briefly, for instance, and we don't really get a lot of his personality in the main four novels Tolkien wrote beyond his like very high up values and goals of taking over and dominating, corrupting his enemies.
And what could be interesting about exploring what goes on in the head of a nearly omnipotent evil mastermind? Almost nothing, I'm sure. But fine, I guess. We'll figure out some things about him. His full legal name is Dar Kennis. He was basically born an evil misanthrope who never got along with others. He was also probably an orphan, as was our protagonist, but we'll draw no meaningful comparisons between them from this. From the moment of his inception, he was a problem to everyone around him and more or less never had any redeeming qualities. Despite this, we'll simply skip forward a bit in his backstory until he took charge of a military force, or perhaps inherited his titles in a noble house, or some other such thing. I mean, how exactly were all of his intolerable qualities overlooked for long enough that he was able to secure this power in people who would listen?
Sounds like Voldemort, but without the depth of character and without how Voldemort was very careful to cultivate his image and to seem like a cool guy back in the day.
Listen to him doesn't really matter. Why is it unimportant?
Also, of course, Voldemort isn't his original name. That's a name he took for himself.
Because everything in life is divided into Team Good and Team Bad. If you're on Team Good, you like rainbows and unicorns and not mass murder. If you're on Team Bad, you're pro putting cats in trees and stealing candy from babies. But most importantly, if you're on Team Bad, you defer to the most powerful member of Team Bad by default. It's not like you'd have ambitions of your own, or that the fundamental selfishness and greed that tends to define evil characters would actually not be conducive to a stable system full of loyal underlings. In fact, any exploration whatsoever into how Dark Kennis's evil empire actually works would be essentially pointless. They're evil and bad, and that's really all there needs to be to it. We understand that they'll fall apart and lose because they're evil. There's no reason to see it play out in real time or to have it destroy itself as the protagonist helps its death throes along. The most important thing to remember about evil is that it's simple and predictable. It'll never do anything you don't expect. But let's talk design for good old Dark Kennis.
This reminds me of totalitarian propaganda of last century, where they would simultaneously say that their enemies were weak and stupid and were going to lose, but also say that their enemies were simultaneously very powerful and dangerous, so people need to always be on guard and always be deferring to the dictatorship and giving up any rights they might have for supposed security. So, interesting little historical parallel to draw upon.
If we were to pick a department store that would
Okay, let me try this one. Lots of black and red clothing, skulls, fire, in a sci-fi, saying you can also do like in a sci-fi saying you can do things like white and gold and it'd be like very like sterile and decadent and uncaring, that sort of thing. But for more fancy things, hmm. Yeah, probably those. Maybe maybe inspired by the Roman Empire or okay, let's be real. With the with this series that's probably what it's going to go with, but let's see if I'm right.
Match his vibe, it would be Hot Topic. We're going to fit as many spikes on this guy as anatomy allows us to do.
I'm sorry, I should have said something about the spikes and horns, of course. My mistake.
And then some beyond that. He'll wear a suit of black steel armor and a hood, and instead of a helmet, there will be a skull. And all of the spikes are skull-shaped. And his sword will have a skull on the pommel, and the blades will have skulls carved into them. And his belt buckle and all the various buttons on his jacket will be skulls. This is just to give us a glimpse into his dark and twisted mind. But speaking of that skull-pommeled sword, we need a name for it. It'll be Gorath, the Drinker of Worlds, the Doomer of Souls, the Frauder of
Where's the skull? Oh, this is great.
taxes. He called it a business expense on his tax returns this last year, even though he didn't buy it, but instead stole it because he's evil. It's very important to give all the
Honestly, having the villain do tax returns is probably the most detailed and realistic part of this whole video.
other pieces of his equipment similar names, but also to never explain what they actually are. Can the silliness of this wrap around into actually being kind of badass, or at least funny, if you really commit to it? Yes, and that's why we're not going to. Remember, the most important thing about writing is to imply substance and depth rather than worrying about actually having any. Dark Hennis will live in a dark and forbidding castle in the middle of a volcanic wasteland. The castle will be extremely large and
I'm gonna go see that castle.
extremely large and could possibly have a forbidding castle.
Okay, like obviously this is fiction, but it doesn't look too bad as long as there's like structural supports and you have a way to make sure the enemy doesn't just take it out here or cut it here and you cut it here and you lose a bunch of stuff. Kind of looks like there's supposed to be something here, but I mean honestly, like put something here so you have a good walkway and I'm not a huge fan of this route. This looks insecure, and here, like, seal up here, cover over, fix there, make sure it doesn't fall. But yeah. Oh, and yeah, build something out here. I don't know, like, it's a pretty decent bad guy layer, I guess. Though, of course, these would have to be, like, giants or something, because if these are just normal people, then obviously there's no way anyone would fit in there. Unless maybe they're gnomes or something? I don't know.
Castle in the middle of a volcanic wasteland. The castle will be extremely large and could possibly house 10,000 people, but only he lives there, and some of his henchmen, I guess. All 1,000 of these henchmen will be crammed into exactly 2 rooms, 7,500 and 2,500, with the ones he likes more getting to be in the room with only 2,500. These rooms, however, are the size of a school bus. What does he do with the rest of this space and this incredibly large floor plan that he's got for himself? Torture chambers. Look, just because I wrote
This reminds me of the Malevolence, a separatist starship used during the Clone Wars. And I remember watching the episodes just after they came out. And even back then, it struck me with how much of the ship just seemed to be kind of just empty space or trams that were carrying what was it, like boxes around? And yeah, I never fully understood why the ship had to be so big. So yeah, another example of something like this. And if I'm totally wrong and it's just there's like a source book that explains it to make sense, let me know in the comments. Always glad to learn.
a castle into existence doesn't mean I'm going to research what sorts of things people actually put in them. All of those henchmen of his will also wear black armor with skulls on it. Can't forget the skulls, and also the spikes too, because we need to make it extremely obvious how evil these guys are. Form is function after all, and just because they logically would be so covered in spikes and giant skull motifs that they'd have the mobility of Han Solo post-Carbonite doesn't mean that they can't fight just as well as the protagonists. Though if anything, maybe all of those movement-restricting details can be used by me later on to justify why the protagonist is able to outmaneuver them all the time.
Actually, good point. Well, real-life armor is way less restrictive generally than some people seem to think. It does impede your movement a bit, and if someone was wearing very heavy armor with spikes that got in the way, that could be a very, very logical reason why a more lithe opponent would be able to do a bit of stabby stab to weak areas.
And I mean, it's not like armor is worn to be useful after all. Now for his powers.
I'm sorry. No. On this channel, armor is useful. Anyway, let's get back to
Every
video.
good Dark Lord has to have powers after all. And not powers like Sauron did. Sauron was lame because Frodo didn't get into a sword fight with him at the end of the movie, because Frodo would have lost that. No, we definitely need a good sword fight. But before that, he needs to demonstrate his immense power on unimportant NPC characters so that we can show how cool and scary Dark Hennis is. We'll give him telekinesis so he can strangle people from afar, and even mind control that's implied to be almost flawless. Why won't this mind control work on the protagonist? Because protagonist Von Generic, or Bartholomew the Bold, the Slayer of Dragons and all my detractors online, is simply stronger of mind than all those worthless no-name people who fall for it. Does introducing a mind control power like this risk causing plot problems other than that? I don't think so. Dark Hennis just uses his mind control to make those minions that don't want to follow him continue to do so. How many people
Actually, good, intelligent use of the power, and cutting it off before he ruins it, because that's how these videos go. If it was just left there, it would make a lot of sense, and could even be a good justification for why Dark Hennis doesn't win in certain situations, that he has to keep a lot of his power tied up in controlling his minions, and if he lapsed it so he could win his current engagement, then his minions would wake up and would all rebel or something.
can he mind control at once? How long does it last? You will not worry about it. We've been talking about Dark Hennis through his minions and his powers and all of that sort of thing. All of these aspects which imply his strength. But what does the realm he rules over with that strength actually look like? Well, thankfully, we needn't much
Skulls, right?
creativity, and we can bring back up our classic and flawless map, the likes of which has never been seen before. We can place him right smack here in the middle of Evilia, the land of no sunshine and certainly no rainbows. As you might remember from past videos, this place is basically made of ash and dust and rocks. There are no farms because bad guys still don't know how to farm, but there also aren't rivers either. Rivers give the impression of natural beauty, of something pure, and we can't even risk implying any of that aesthetic. So there's no water for anyone basically ever. They import it or something, I guess. Ooh, or maybe there is a river, but it's all polluted and green and brown. We can make a half-hearted point about environmentalism that way, even though we're writing in a pre-industrial setting and are not actually going to address why the water looks that way. Evil magic or something is the reason.
Though to be fair, I'm certain there are ways you could tackle topics like the current environment in real life today, and you could have a theme similar to that, even if there aren't exactly the same technological elements in your story.
Why would the bad guys pollute their literal one source of water? Because they're so evil and short-sighted that even maintaining drinking water for themselves is beyond their capability. Doesn't that make them seem intimidating and not hopelessly stupid? And of course, we cannot have a Dark Lord without his inevitable defeat. If anything, a Dark Lord is defined by their defeat. In so many stories, the Dark Lord is a presence more than a character. They're a force in the world, something we aren't meant to fully understand until we encounter it firsthand. By showing how the Dark Lord is defeated, you're expressing to the audience your theme. Sauron is defeated by his arrogance and underestimating those humble heroes. The Emperor and Vader, they're defeated by a son's love for his father that's finally reciprocated. These are what define whatever it is you want more than anything to express to the
We were so close. We were so close, weren't we?
Weird. Right, well, it's
Did Dark Hennis mind control him so that he wouldn't make an unironic statement?
time to write our Dark Lord's defeat scene. Naturally, by this time, our hero, protagonist Von Generic, or maybe Bartholomew, will be marching up to the evil castle of grimly dark, darkly grim darkness, with his whole squad in tow. With the final fight approaching, we have to choose one of a few options, as there are only a couple ways a Dark Lord can be defeated. The first of those is, of course, through the power of friendship. Our protagonist and his allies will stand together to face down the Dark Lord and beat him as a team. Is it because of their simple numerical advantage? Of course not. Is it because throughout their trials and tribulations they finally learned how to work together to serve one end, to complement one another's strengths and compensate for their weaknesses? Of course not. Is it even because one or more of these friends is willing to lay down their life for these people they've traveled with for so long, if they'd cut their own life short just so that those of the people they care about might go on? No, we can't kill any important characters. You're not meant to feel things at the conclusion of a story. No, if we do the power of friendship, it's because there's a literal power of friendship, a magical one. They all touch pinky fingers and generate the energy equivalent to an atomic bomb and blow up Dark Lord Dark Ennis, alongside all his cronies and the castle.
Well, at least this time, it's being honest about if it's going to be this vaguely defined thing, and it's not going to be grounded in like coordination and working together in a clear way. I mean, if it's going to be invoking a star to blast away the enemy, I mean, fair enough, I guess.
Not only does this give us an excellent finish, but also has only positive implications. Oh, what about all the other
I I don't know if I'd call Radiation Fallout positive, but you do you. So that's a joke.
times a group of friends or
As in, like, I'm being, like, sarcastic because this is a silly video. Obviously, irradiation is bad for you. Stay away from it.
a family were defeated by the Dark Lord or otherwise could not overcome whatever dangers faced them, well, their bond simply wasn't strong enough. Certainly not stronger than the bond of my 5-man band who've known each other for like a month and 3/5 of which have only spoken a single-digit number of lines. But if we're not feeling that, there's always the option of making Dark Ennis secretly our protagonist's father. But unfortunately, we've made both protagonist and Bartholomew have dead parents, because that's basically a requirement for writing a hero, so that's unlikely. Perhaps they need to destroy a valuable MacGuffin. The floor bucks, a series of dollar bills scattered conveniently around the kingdom. When collected, they can be torn in half to destroy a portion of Dark Ennis's soul. Why would he leave these laying around rather than doing literally everything in his power to keep them on his person at all times? Or better yet, hiding them in such a place that they could never be found? I don't know, he forgot about them, and it's not like with his boundless resources, his expansive territory, nor his countless minions, that he could do anything to gather them up anyway, even if he did remember they existed. And why does he have these weaknesses in the first place? So instead, I think the initial impression was right. We have to have it come down to a sword fight. It'll really send home our theme. Only the strongest win fights, and the weak lose them. It might fly over some people's heads, but the intellectuals and the critics will get what I'm going for. In the first moments of the sword fight, all the heroes except for our protagonist will be knocked aside and be down for the count for the remainder of their encounter. Does that make their inclusion and all their character growth? That's a thing that's actually been happening. Was for almost nothing? Not at all. They've added tension to the end here. And so they clash for minutes.
Also, if this was being presented more seriously, you could take the approach of the Dark Lord freezing or stunning all these people, that the effort of doing that, and I mean, apparently also mind controlling a bunch of minions who would otherwise rebel or something, but that might mean that he's just burnt out all of his reservoir, and so that he can't use magic for the fight, and therefore the main character has an advantage because maybe the main character is a better athlete and duelist.
Minutes or maybe hours, but eventually our protagonist will get the better of him. He'll then deliver a one-liner. "Black's not my color," he'll say, and
That was so cringe.
then cut off the Dark Lord's head, spilling his blood all over the place.
Okay. Yes, thank you. I'm a big fan of, in fiction, when a character does something like the decapitating blow to a powerful enemy to, generally, I know some stories, some people can like return as a ghost or even regenerate from losing a head or something, but generally that's a pretty good way of ensuring that someone's taken out. And so I always enjoy it in stories where there's a character who goes ahead and makes certain, because, you know, the trope of if you don't see someone be beheaded or disintegrated, you can't know if they're dead. Are they coming back in the sequel? And I mean, honestly, I do like seeing characters return and recur a lot, but it's good sometimes to have a character who makes sure.
Or maybe in the movie adaptation, we can make it a more PG-13 friendly kick down into a bottomless pit. That way we can ensure the lower age rating to make sure we get more tickets sold, as well as leaving room for a sequel, of
Pretty much echoed what I just said.
which there will be 11, of course. I don't really know what those will look like yet, but that doesn't really matter. It's not like you ever really need a long-term plan for these sorts of things. But there, I think we've covered how to make the best, worst Dark Lord possible and learn some things in the process. Anyway, if this sounds like a place you want to be, we have a Discord if you want to hang out with my editor and I, and a Patreon if you're crazy enough to want to, where we post all our videos early. As we close out, I'd like to thank those patrons of ours: Shadowrunner, Sonny, Isaac Parrott, Raymond, Don, Sadako, Cavalier, Sazabi, Shieldmaid Fenya, and Michelle of the Knights of the Inner Circle, Vian and Jody on Void, our Knights, and Greer, TOW, Craig, Victoria, Lauren, Noah, and Saint Sir Nicholas, our loyal squires.
Huh, would you look at that? Thank you.
And remember, a good Dark Lord's always watching, even if you don't always see him.
Good outro. Alright, well, let last couple seconds play. So yeah, pretty cool video, and I hope you got some advice on what the worst Dark Lord possible is, and I hope that I, in some way, made it even funnier, or said something educational. And as ever, please check out the rest of my channel, and also check out his. And most importantly, I hope you have a wonderful day.